take another belief that seemingly would have very minor consequences. Consider the Catholic belief that condom use is sinful. Okay, now this is obviously, from my point of view, obviously a total falsification of morality. I mean, this is one thing that religious dogma does is it separates questions of morality from questions of real suffering, human suffering, animal suffering. Here we have no discernible suffering at all, and yet we're told it's a moral proposition that condom use is ethically problematic. What are the possible consequences here? Well, we have millions of people every year dying of AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa alone. And you have, quite literally, Catholic ministers preaching the sinfulness of condom use in villages where the only information about condom use is the representation of the ministry. It seems to me that we should not, the time for respecting religious beliefs of this sort is long past. You take another effect of religious dogmatism in my own country. We have college-educated politicians resisting stem cell research, certainly impeding its progress, not funding it, putting up one roadblock after another. Probably one of the most promising lines of research in biology to generate medical therapies is being impeded by this medieval notion that the soul enters the zygote at the moment of conception, and therefore blastocysts in a petri dish, literally undifferentiated clumps of cells, have to be given the same kind of moral concern, have the same interests, have the same... No one even talks about suffering, but presumably we're worried about their experience at some level. And that the interests of these cells trump the interests of 8-year-old girls with diabetes or 40-year-old men with Parkinson's. Okay, the conversation never gets had. The moral arguments never even have to be made at a political level because it is fundamentally taboo to criticize someone's religious beliefs. Faith is really a conversation stopper. Now, in response to these sorts of problems, many of us, many well-intentioned people, have come to think that the appropriate accommodation with modernity is to develop what's called religious moderation, generally. You can have your God, you can talk about him in some, or her in some unspecified way. It's considered unseemly to be too sure about what happens after death and about the moral structure to this universe, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Religious moderation is the way to go. And really the soul of religious moderation is this political correctness, where everyone should be free to believe whatever he wants about God. There's just no harm, no foul, beliefs are private. Let me tell you for a moment why I think this is a dead end. First of all, religious moderation gives cover to religious fundamentalism. Because we cannot criticize religious extremism, religious literalism, because it's politically taboo, it's considered uncivil, and this is really enforced by religious moderates. Religious fundamentalists, they'll criticize every faith but their own. You know, the religious fundamentalists in my country will say Islam is an evil religion. Religious moderates balk at that. And so now we can't, George Bush can call a press conference and announce to the world that he's going to appoint common sense judges. This is a quote. I'm going to appoint common sense judges who realize that our rights are derived from God. Now, it seems to me the next sensible question by any journalist in the room would be, Mr. President, how is that any different from appointing common sense judges that realize that our rights are derived from Poseidon? I mean, it's not like someone in the 3rd century actually figured out that the biblical God exists, but Poseidon doesn't. You know, this is not data that we have. Okay, this obviously would be the last question that journalist would ever ask. Okay, we can't call a spade because it is because of this taboo around criticizing religion. And I would argue that religious moderates are really the greatest offenders here, the greatest force propping up this taboo. Another problem with religious moderation is actually intellectually bankrupt. When you just consider for a moment this notion that you should respect other people's beliefs. Where else in our discourse do we encounter this? I mean, when was the last time anyone in this room was admonished to respect another person's beliefs about history or biology or physics? We do not respect people's beliefs. We evaluate their reasons. If my reasons are good enough for believing what I believe, you will helplessly believe what I believe. I will give you my reasons, and reasons are contagious. That is what it is to be a rational human being. Respecting another person's beliefs never enters into it. Just appreciate for a moment how easy this is to see when we just change the subject from God to some mundane, grandiose claim. This is actually an example from my book. If I told you that I believe that there was a diamond buried in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator, it might occur to you to ask me why. If in response I gave the kinds of answers you hear from religious moderates, the answers that describe the good effects of this, of believing as I do. So I said things like, well, this belief actually gives my life a lot of meaning. Or, I wouldn't want to live in a universe where there wasn't a diamond buried in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator. I mean, it's pretty clear that responses of this sort are deeply inadequate. They're worse than that. They are the responses of a lunatic or an idiot. I mean, by responding in that way, I would have disqualified myself for any position of responsibility in a first world society. Except you change the subject to religion, to the moral demands of an invisible superintelligence, to what happens after death, and all bets are off. Then you can say anything you want.